It's the Sod Pod, brought to you by Grassland Agro. The Sod Pod.
Hello, and welcome to the Sod Pod. So welcome to the final episode. We are back with the usual podcast. So we have Stephen Carey and John Brennan, and we're also joined by one of the old original podcasts, John O'Loughlin. Welcome to the podcast, John.
Sound Pete, thanks, Mel.
So for this podcast, we're going to be talking a little bit, I suppose, towards the end of the year now. We're going to talk a little bit on us reviewing 2025, taking a wee look at what went well, and I suppose how we fared out. Can we take any learnings for going forward into 2026? John, I'll pull you in first. Any thoughts on how we went in 2025? Was it positive in your side of the country, or what do you reckon? Say, Gio, I'll specify from now on.
I'm only an imposter now, P, with John Brennan has been a mainstay of the pod there while I've been removed from the situation. It's no, it isn't. In balance, like as regards grass growing wise, probably best year ever for the West. But a lot of, if you listen to farmers in general senses, where it was all rainbows and sunshine, but like in reality, a lot of farmers had real challenges with drought throughout the year, which kind of significantly impacted grass production, probably profitability as well. I know 90% of milk was probably produced at a high milk price, but that's going to have an impact of that additional cost as well. So in balance, you'd say it was a good year for most, but you have to recognise some people had a fair challenge with it too. I suppose the question me and you often talk about, Peter, is like, if you were in the areas that weren't affected by drought and you still found it difficult maybe to keep grass in front of cows or growing off silage, probably a big conversation to be had there around your stocking rate.
Yeah, no, 100%, John. I think even if we revert right back to the start of the year, like in the springtime, it was probably one of the best spring times we had, I suppose, in a long time. And I mean, generally speaking, on that, in the springtime, we're usually battling weather conditions, and while we do have a plan in place, we always have it didn't go to plan because of the weather, we had rain or whatever it was. Whereas this year, I suppose, we didn't have that. I'm going to say we didn't have the weather affecting us, so if a plan didn't go to place this spring, you're probably back to looking at, I suppose, what didn't go well. Is it an issue from the management point of view, or is it from what you're saying there on stocking rate? Is it maybe the time you're calving, and just looking a little bit deeper under the hood? Just, I suppose, it's important to take the learnings from that.
That's a good point.
I suppose
you're probably looking there, P, as well. Your closing cup for the next few weeks.
That's right, yeah, and I suppose, look, it seems, I suppose, while we're this side of Christmas, but I suppose it's always about trying to plan ahead and be one step ahead. So I suppose, Clodagh, what are we seeing out there at the minute in that regard?
I suppose, just Peter, as a reminder to farmers to, if you are putting in your closing cover there in pasture base, to get it done there this week. Maybe not today now in the status orange weather warning, but there'll be plenty of time towards the end of the week. But I suppose, your closing grass cover is going to have an influence on grass availability next spring. So I suppose you'd want to be having an average farm cover of 750 to 800 around this time of the year. Over the winter time, depending on where you are, but you'll grow between 3 and 4 kilos of dry matter per day. Fast forward 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks, hopefully that'll be an extra 180, 200 kilos on top of your average farm cover. So ideally in the springtime, you'd be open at an average farm cover of about 1,000. So it's vital to get that figure in at the moment to determine where you're going to be at in the springtime.
And I suppose the importance of that, Claude, is really, it comes back to the value of that grass in the springtime, isn't it? Like, I suppose when you look at the energy content of the grass and what it can provide to the cow, it's such a, critical time. I suppose if she's ramping up production and dropping off body condition, it's a hugely valuable, feed at that period of time. And I suppose just maybe if we even go past the spring, last year and talking about spring covers, John, you mentioned there already about different droughts. From the P and K point of view and building on fertility, is there any learnings we can take or help us to, withstand those droughts? Or what's your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think so. Listen, everyone's experienced more drought, and for me, what are we going to do about drought? So, like, this has been covered fairly regularly. It was at the Farmers Journal Dairy Day. It was covered at the Teagasc Dairy Conference as well, Peter. But for me, the first thing is to make sure that you have no suboptimal potassium index on your farm. And that is really the starting point, because like K has such an important role in mitigating the effects of drought. And that would be the number one action. It's not that difficult. Like, people are coming up with all sort of maybe complicated notions now, no offense to Stephen, but like of complicating the system with maize or beet or X, Y, or Z, like, but getting your soil fertility as good as it can be is probably number one. Now, listen, if you get into soil moisture deficit of 60, 70 mil, it doesn't matter if you had an index 25 potash. But like, it's those little bits of pinches that you're getting into a green drought, and your growth rates are really suffering really quickly because your potassium levels aren't optimal. That to me, I don't know what you think, lads, would be a number one for
yeah. Like, would it be a fair point to make, like, you talk about the good growing season there last year in P's and K's, there was a lot of surplus bales made from paddocks on farms across the country over the summer. And then when you have, as we talked about in previous episodes, when you're taking silage offtakes from paddocks or fields, you're not replacing the P's and K's from grazing livestock. You're not you're losing a lot more K and P. And as you said there, John, like, K is very important in drought. K is a very important macro mineral for, I suppose, water regulation in a plant. Would that be a fair comment to make, like, just for farmers, just to keep an eye on offtakes from surplus bales made?
What would be, John, to be fair, like, I suppose when you look at K, it's required, and it needed much larger amounts, I suppose, so you get a deficit that much quicker, and it can be quite hard on the ground. And I suppose tying back in with the drought, and if you look at how it fits into regulation, like, I suppose there's no regulation on the amount of K we can apply, unlike the nitrogen and the phosphorus, but yet no, when you look at the stats, it's still on par in terms of being suboptimal with both your phosphorus. So, like, it's not really a regulation issue. I suppose it's probably a little bit more challenging just from the management point of view, that you're not going in, I suppose, with too much early in the year and having further knock-on effects, I suppose, on the likes of, silage that's going to then potentially be, at risk of having high K in it and causing other digestive upsets, I suppose, round the winter period. So no, that is all very, very much relevant. I suppose, Stephen, on the tillage side of things, we're talking a lot of grass growing year. What was it like out there?
Sure, Peter, it was very good in some ways, and it was a challenging year for tillage farmers in other ways. If you go back to sowing winter crops last autumn, 2024, we had a good back end to that year. Crops came through the winter fairly well, and then we got into spring sowing. Some of the earliest we were sowing crops, the spirits were high, and after spring crops were sown, there was a few heavy slaps of rain around Easter and that, which may have knocked some spring crops. But all in all, like, most crops came on well, and we'd mixed weather throughout the summer then, which lent itself well for growth and developing yields. We had a good lash of BYDV and spring barley then, which showed very visible symptoms in the summertime. And we suppose we had a bit of rain around the grain filling stage in wheat, which caused fusarium in some areas. But like the sowing, the harvest then was brilliant for a workload point of view. Probably one of the earliest harvests in record or in memory. But from a workload point of view, it was a very good year, and the weather mostly came at the right times. But as I'm always on about the doom and gloom of the grain price, that was holding the whole thing back, and it has the sector in poor spirits at the moment. Looking forward then for the coming season, how can we mitigate that? What I'm doing on my own farm, it's something we've always done, is just have a good portfolio, a diverse portfolio of crops. So you're spreading the risk, don't have all your eggs in one basket. We particularly like to have winter crops because it mitigates the risks of extreme weather events in the springtime. They seem to cope with it better. So we cut back on our winter oats area, and we'll probably grow more spring beans now in light of a CBAM, which is probably going to increase nitrogen prices. So we'll have a less of a nitrogen requirement. But what I'd say going forward for the coming year, we're going to try control costs, but we're not going to do anything that's going to compromise yields. And that's kind of the similar setup for dairy sector in the year coming forward, isn't it?
Would be Stephen, like, and I know, I think, John, you were at the conference there, or last week was the National Dairy Conference, and like there was something about, that was touched on from controlling costs, but also being very much where not to compromise on the areas that are going to make the most return, I suppose, which is obviously one of them is your soil, and a bit what you said earlier about your P's and K's. Was that the message?
So obviously, they started off the conference with an outlook for milk price, and similar to Stephen's story on the grain, it wasn't, to put it mildly. But the key message was control costs. Probably a lot of costs have been incurred in relation to, so we're going to probably see a higher depreciation over the next couple of years because of capex, and machinery costs, machinery investments maybe over the real good years. We've seen the result of that after the real good year in 22 as well. So depreciation is going to be higher. What farmers are encouraged to do is do a cash budget as well. So the actual cash costs. So like depreciation maybe doesn't factor into some people's equation when they're doing their costs, but it is a cost. The key message was that don't compromise on anything that's going to either help you grow or utilize more grass. So like fertilizer, graze infrastructure, P's and K's. I've always been challenged in Teagasc that there needs to be like a capital fertilizer budget. So basically, when it comes to discussion groups or farmers considering, measuring each other or benchmarking each other in relation to their site fertility and their, what improvement needs to be made. A farmer might have done the hard yards maybe over the last 20 years in relation to site fertility, and they just need to, a small bit of maintenance and their nitrogen and sulfur, whereas other farmers might need to have a big investment in P&K, and maybe because of, maybe they're comparing apples with oranges, that's part of the reason why we haven't really turned the dial in site fertility. So that's only my own opinion, but that's something that needs to be brought into the equation, is like an allowance or in New Zealand they call it a capital fertilizer, so an investment in the farm, and then your nitrogen and sulfur be considered separately then.
So I suppose really is what you're saying is you're sort of benchmarking, I suppose, the farm in terms of cost, where it's at from a soil fertility point of view. Obviously that you're not working off, I suppose, someone's costs or benchmarking off similar costs of someone who's invested heavily and just maybe at the other end of it in terms of just at the maintenance level. Whereas the guy who's just starting off, who's building, And I suppose, look, that ties probably back into the whole piece of, a bit like what we touched on earlier in terms of balancing your stocking rate and, earlier in the springtime and that. But it really comes back to matching that to what I suppose, the growing ability of the farm. And it's not about us to say, we're here to say it should be stocking rate X, Y, or to match X amount of tons. It's really, you have to do the number crunching on your own farm. And I suppose at least be aware of where you're at and, whatever decision or whatever kind of what would you say, system you're going to implement, at least that you're doing it, knowing the figures that's behind it.
One thing for me, Pete, just on that before we go off the dairy conference, is that featured heavily. Like, were you at the one with Kevin? Like, no, it was clashing with the dairy. You were tied up with it. Anyways, listen, one of the all those topics around stocking rate, grass growth, not to compromise your stocking rate too much, because that's increases your grass utilized and stuff like that. But for me, it's boiled down to the figure we need that kind of takes a lot of the variables out of it, is the grass utilized per livestock unit, even per hectare. Like, so it seems that the difference between exceptional performance and maybe mid-tier performance is utilizing only an extra kind of 300 kilos or even 400 kilos of grass dry matter per livestock per year. So like trying to go from the average of in around 3.5 per dairy cow up to closer to 4. And that's where you're unlocking all your solids. That's where you're really driving performance. And then this debate about, if you want to feed on more meal or more concentrate to drive production, you have maximized, because if you hit the 4-ton figure of grazed grass, and obviously you could argue silage in that as well, but you hit that 4-ton figure of high quality grass and your pre-grazing yield is right, you've maximized what you can get from the genetics in the grass, because you're always going into to actually intake that much grass. You're going into rye covers, you have the grass available, X, Y, and Z, and then if you want to feed on your ton and a half or whatever, that's up to yourself, but you've maximised grass, where there was still this big debate over whether they should be feeding 1.2 tonne or 800 kilos or 1.5 tonne, and that's kind of probably missing the point. It's down to grass first and then worry about the meal then, whatever you decide yourself is my opinion. I don't know, you might disagree with me now on that one. But
Slightly going off that point then, from a tillage perspective, I'm quite interested in building indexes at home too. You've such high offtakes with crops, and they're so important for building yield as well, but it's important to replace them. We've started a new strategy at home now. In the past, we had a flawed strategy. We're on such a wide spreading width. We were spreading our P's and K's in the autumn time because we couldn't spread them at our tramline width in the growing crops in the springtime. But that spreading your phosphorus in the autumn time is a very inefficient use of P, as I've learnt since starting with Grassland Agro. I've developed my knowledge of phosphorus. We have a new strategy now. So we're working on a field by field basis. It's not quite variable rate technology, but it's kind of a happy medium. We're not using that technology, but we're using a soil test and analysis. We're spreading our MOP in the back end, a little bit like a dairy system. We're building the indexes then because we're struggling at our spreading weight in the springtime in the growing crop. And then in the springtime we're going spreading a top phos, and that's going to be a straight product. It's a phosphorus plus sulfur product. So that's a CCF, and we'll have no bother spreading that at our spreading weight. Well, I suppose the advantage of the top phos is that it's phosphorus and sulfur built with a humic acid. So the product isn't available for lockup, and the phosphorus only becomes available to the plant. As the plant is growing, it releases the exudates from the roots, and that breaks down the granule and releases the phosphorus for uptake. So you get far more efficient use of phosphorus, and it's far better for building indexes. But as I said, we're going on a field by field basis. So we're just trying to, I suppose that's one way we're controlling our costs, and we're just maximising efficiency in a time when grain prices are quite low. You have to look at these strategies to get the most out of what you're spending.
And I think, Stephen, look, you said on something there important too. You're going after the soil test and tailoring to that solution. That's really, look, that's a no-brainer probably for any farm, regardless whether you're tillage and dairy. When you look at the costs of it, like, it's a very small cost on a per acre basis when you break it down, especially that it lasts even over the 4 years. And we would be working with some farms who even up to test maybe on a 2 or 3 year basis, even just for the points you're mentioning there, to try and even build on that fertility and obviously target it where it's actually needed, and to get the data back into the system, I suppose, to make decisions off that. I suppose just something else maybe to mention there, a bit of positive news that came out this morning was the derogation there now for another 3 years. It's come through from the Commission pushed it over in terms of putting the approval forward, and the Nitrates Committee this morning, just before we come on this podcast, had announced that they have approved it for a 3 year extension. So I suppose that's a positive one we can see, and I suppose it'll help a lot of farms to, I suppose, plan for the next 3 years and whatnot. I suppose there is a few extra conditions. John, have you hear much on it yet, or I suppose if we'd wait to see what sort of devil's in the detail?
Yeah, sure. Listen, this milking platform stopper rate looks like it could be a challenge for farmers to get their head around. I know we'll cover it more in spring, Peter, or when they finally lay down in the SI, and it's a challenge for nutrient management plans. Like, the key thing is that, we have to drive on trying to do nutrients regardless. It's not going to affect our P or, K recommendations. So might tweak the nitrogen slightly, but realistically, what is recommended, move and slurry if you're heavily stocked on your milking platform off, is probably the right thing to be doing anyway. So I from an agronomy point of view, I don't have an issue with it, but it will add an area of complexity for sure. Massive news, 3 years probably for plan your business. Like, if you even think about a loan for a capital expenditure, you'd probably be hoping to put it out over 7 years. So like, you've kind of, you're not even 50% of that term of that loan. So like, the appropriate assessment will allow it to be done, but like, it seems like the body of work that's required for the appropriate assessment is going to be absolutely monumental. Like, and I know there's tenders out or expressions of interest looked for from the department to do that, but that's going to be a mother and father of the job now, to be fair. So hopefully that will get done, and they refine the terms. Because if it's based on the ad minimus, which is basically that you have to prove that there's no potential risk. Like, you know, like there's a potential risk that I could get blown away here out of the office in Dublin, storm, or, you know, and like that. So there's always potential risk, but that kind of definition and terminology is shored up. It would be very important in my opinion.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I suppose, as you say there, with while 3 years was great, you know, obviously for the longer term, you know, it's still going to be a concern. And I suppose something there that was name checked in it, and that we probably yet to be clarified, is potentially a further cut in nitrogen for the derogation farmers, which was 5%, like, which I suppose when we factor in, you know, over the last number of years, all farms got 10% of a cut. Some higher stock farms already had a 5% on top of that. You know, it is going to be a challenge, and back to the grass growing piece, you know, it's really going to be a challenge just to maintain what we have done in the past in terms of a total tons grown, be it, you know, for grazing, or be it through, you know, cutting for silage, whatever it is, maybe, you know.
100%.
I suppose that kind of encourages soil to continue to be more efficient with our fertilizers all the time, and as we do say, like, have the right product, the right place, right time.
Absolutely. I suppose, Clodagh, you're out in a few farms recently. I know you were talking a little bit on the selective dry cow therapy. Is that still, how are farmers approaching that now? I suppose I know it was brought in a couple of years ago.
Yeah, look, something a little bit different, I suppose, to the soil fertility side of things, but I suppose it goes without saying this time of the year, look, it's a mixed bag across the country now. Some farmers are fully dried off, some are working in batches, just depending, I suppose, when your calving date starts. But I suppose, look, when I talk about drying off, I kind of tend to break it into 3 different sections. So I suppose with the selective dry cow therapy, you need to do your bit of homework at the start. So looking at your milk recordings, scanning dates, things like that. You have your actual drying off process, so hygiene is very important there, and then you have your post dry cow management then, which hygiene is then very important as well. And John Brennan is going to talk a little bit about pre-calver minerals as well there in a minute. But I suppose on the homework side of it, looking at your milk recordings, you're identifying your cows there that are high somatic cell count cows. And looking at cows that might have potential for selective dry off. So you're looking at cows that have, I suppose, looking at your most recent milk recordings, cows that have no clinical history of clinical cases of mastitis, and cows that are below a somatic cell count of your 50,000. So as well, another handy thing that is worth doing is an actual bacterial test of your milk as well. It's always good to know what kind of bacteria you're actually dealing with. Is it a contagious form like your Staph aureus, which is a very, I suppose, detrimental form of mastitis? Once it gets into a herd, it's very, very hard to get rid of it, and it spreads very, very quickly. Then you have your environmental forms, so the likes of E. coli, your strep uberis. Hygiene is very important here because they're environmental forms of mastitis. The likes of your scanning dates, so when cows are close to calving, when they're going to calve in January or February or March, body condition score, litres being produced, is all going to come into effect on who is dried off first. The drying off process, I suppose, main thing here is hygiene is most important. You know, it's a high risk area. You don't want to, I suppose, that goes for both the operator and the cow being hygienic. You know, you don't want to be introducing new forms of bacteria into that environment as well. The dry off cow management then is very, very important, especially there at the drying off period, and 2 weeks pre and post calving is a haven for bacteria. So your bedding agent that you're using is very important. So what you're doing with your bedding agent is you're creating an unfavorable environment for bacteria to grow. So I suppose when we talk about soil fertility, we want to create an ideal environment for bacteria to mineralize nitrogen. So what you need there is you need temperature, moisture, you need correct pH, and you need a food source. So when we're looking at soil fertility and we want to get to the right pH for a grassland mineral soil, we're talking about 6.5. So when you're looking at your cubicles and you don't want bacteria to grow, the only things you can really change is your moisture and your pH. You can't really do much about the temperature. So when you're looking at a bedding agent, I would always ask what the pH is. So you want something that's going to bring it outside that range of 6.5 to 7, and it needs to be a drying agent. So a good test to do with your bedding agent is to actually put it into water. So if you put 1 scoop of whatever drying bedding agent you're using and put in 3 scoops of water, you'll actually be able to see how much water it can absorb. Is a very good test. We have a product there called ActiSan. It's a very good product. A lot of farmers are using it. They use it at times of drying off, pre and post calving and calving pens, calf pens, and some farmers use it on cubicles throughout the year. But ActiSan will actually bring the pH to about 4.5. So it's creating that unfavorable environment for bacteria. And if you put ActiSan actually in a cup of water and leave it for 20 minutes, half an hour, it completely dries out the water. So it's a very useful bedding agent there as well.
All very relevant, Claude, and I suppose it's really, you're talking there nearly about there's three probably key pieces there. The first point you're saying is getting the paperwork out. So looking at the milk recordings, you're probably talking a minimum of, be right, you probably need a minimum of 4 right across the year, probably even distributed. Would that be fair to say? And you're identifying cows less than 50.
Yeah.
And then I suppose with that, then obviously it comes, then the second piece is actually having adequate hygiene at the drying off phase. Because well and good obviously having the milk recordings there, but if it's not executed properly, there's going to be different risks there. And then you're following up then on the third piece there, in that obviously it's I suppose there's a bigger risk there after that 2-week period after dry off, but subsequently carrying that, I suppose, hygiene right across the dry period. But that 2-week period can typically be the higher risk after dry off. So 3 probably key areas there that farmers need to work on. When we are talking in the cow house and around dry off, any other thoughts in terms of, I suppose, what we need to mention is their body condition, minerals? What's the thoughts?
I think definitely when you're looking at grouping cows, you need to be monitoring body condition score throughout that dry cow period. And if there are cows that need to gain a little bit more condition over the dry cow period, dry them off earlier and keep an eye on their milk production as well. If they're producing anything less than 9 litres a day, they need drying off as well. And I think, John, you were looking at giving adequate pre-calver mineral as well there.
Yeah, thanks, Clodagh. Definitely, just to build on what you said, the dry cow period is an excellent time for cows to achieve their optimum health. It's a great chance for, I suppose, the cow's udder to replenish itself during that period. And as you said there, pre-calving mineral supplementation is non-negotiable this winter and any winter pre-calving. I suppose getting the right minerals in is very important to achieve a good, healthy calf with good calf vitality, good colostrum quality from the cow, and just setting the cow up, I suppose, overall for postpartum fertility. There's many different types of minerals on the market. Every farm will have different preferences, whether it's boluses, powder, or blocks, buckets, whatever it is. I suppose as RATCs say, whatever works on your farm, stick to it. But if there's an issue, it's time to start looking, I suppose, and reflecting on your system and seeing if you need to change your mineral supplementation. I suppose for some of our reps would say, like, if you are getting on well with something like a powder dust, even having a block up is a good way of topping up, I suppose, minerals for a quieter cow. Maybe if there's a bit of bullying going on, if you're having challenges regarding feed space, we've Lunio pre-calving block there that farmers find very good. I suppose the recommendation is to get it out 6, definitely 8 weeks before calving. There's a lot of different, I suppose, macro minerals there in your pre-calving mineral supplements. You have your magnesium. Magnesium is a very important one, I suppose, for preventing slow calving. It has a big role to play in terms of calcium metabolism, which is very important for preventing milk fever. And I'll talk about some problematic metabolic disorders in a few minutes. Magnesium is not stored in the body, so it needs to be replenished. So supplementation is crucial. Phosphorus as well, key for fertility and cycling. Sodium is a big one. I guess like sodium it's kind of like your Uber driver, as I do say sometimes. It's vital for transporting other nutrients around the animal's body. And that's something that's quite prominent in our Lunio pre-calvers, that it's sodium base. Calcium then is an important one not to feed pre-calving, because you don't want to have issues like milk fever. Then you have trace minerals like iodine. Iodine is similar to magnesium and needs to be replenished in the cow's body. It's critical for calf vitality. You've copper, selenium there as well. Selenium is very important to feed at least 6 weeks pre-calving for it to be effective when it's needed by the cow. And then you have a range of vitamins, and also copper, zinc, manganese, cobalt, they're very important ones as well. So just, I suppose, to talk about metabolic disorders, like I talked about milk fever there and the importance of having magnesium in your pre-calf mineral supplementation. You want to prevent the likes of milk fever because it's hugely costly on farm. Like for every case of milk fever, it typically costs, give or take, €312 per case. And when a cow suffers from the likes of milk fever, they can be prone to picking up other issues like subclinical milk fever, metritis, displaced abomasum, which costs about €512 per case. There's a range of issues there I could talk about. So yeah, look, mineral supplementation is a crucial part of the cycle of a cow's year, I guess.
Thanks, John. So I suppose really when you're looking at the pre-calver mineral, there's probably a few key ones there to pick out. You're looking obviously for a high level of the magnesium and the vitamin E, and then obviously for the issues you mentioned there, to I suppose around milk fever, but then even beyond that, there are other vital minerals there in terms of benefiting the calf, in terms of not having weak lethargic calves. Obviously, when you get the cow and calf in the middle of the calving season, the last thing you want is to be dealing with little, I suppose, small weak calves that's, I suppose, requiring a lot of TLC, and therefore the likes of your selenium, your iodine and your copper, all those have a role to play. And then even to touch back on Clodagh, what you're talking about there, and the body condition scoring, I suppose a bit like the soil sampling, it comes back to the importance of actually testing the silage and know what you're feeding, and I suppose ultimately knowing what you want to achieve. If your cows are obviously in pretty good condition, that you're not wanting to gain any condition, feeding rapid fuel silage up on 75 plus DMD to dry cows, it could actually have a knock-on effect in terms of having overfat cows and causing other issues. Whereas if you're at the lower end of the scale, feeding poor quality silage and needing to maybe gain some body condition, obviously, if you don't know what you're feeding, you're going to just push that problem right out to calving and subsequently knock on into breeding. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, 100%. And to get a silage analysis done, you get so much information back off it. It's not relatively expensive, and even to get a mineral analysis done as well, to be able to tailor your pre-calver towards it as well. Even John mentioned them couple of things there to look out for: your calcium, the amount of phosphorus that could be potentially in your silage as well could be linked to the likes of milk fever, magnesium and all those kind of things as well. So it's definitely worth doing.
No, that's great. It's sound advice from both Clodagh and John. I suppose, John O'Loughlin, if we move on nearly past the Christmas period, you're tugging out some of the days on stage.
I am. The Irish Grassland Association Dairy Conference is on Friday the 9th of January, and there's also an evening on before that, Peter, a social evening. So there's quite a good lineup. So basically, Paul Hyland, who's a past president of the IGA, is going to interview a businessman and now farmer, Michael Ward, on the night before. So, and people come down, might have a few pints and listen to the conversation in advance of the conference. Then the conference kicks off the following morning, 9:45. Registration from 9. Starting off with a very strong lineup now of Aidan Brennan, dairy editor in the Farmers Journal, with Lawrence Shalhoub, who'd be kind of well known across the industry as well. And they're going to kind of see, right, we're in a tricky situation, like what do we need to do to try and farm our way out of it. Then the second session, I'm actually chairing that. So the title of that is Growing 14 plus tons of grass. How can this be done? Nobody knows probably at the moment, but we're going to hear from Michael O'Donovan, or Mick Donovan as he's better known, from who's Chagas. Dairy farmer, a very, I suppose, and would have done a lot of work with Mick as well, is John Mack there from Limerick. John's a brilliant farmer. He's won probably every award there is in the industry. A lot of people know John. He's the chairman of the Grass 10 program as well. Very good operator, mad for hurling, which sure we'll knock a bit of crack out of him on the day of that. The last time I actually was on farm with John, we were doing a launch of a thing, and the two of us, those cringy photos you have to do. He was kneeling down beside me, and I whispered in his ear. This was back in March 2024. I said, "Clare are going to win the All Ireland this year, John," and he was laughing at me. And lo and behold, I was right. And then the final person is Kevin Moran. Now, Kevin, probably, a lot of people know Kevin from his story, of starting out in Cardiff-Strand in Galway, partnership and growing into a massive business in a very short period of time. Magnificent story as well, and doing a super job with grass. Then there's lunch, and then the final session is going to be chaired and a presentation from Donald Welton, AIB. A lot of people know Donald as well, very good speaker. And there's going to be Chris Cahill of Cavan Grassland Consultancy, and obviously he's a dairy farmer now in a partnership up around in Westmeath. And then David Fogarty and Katie O'Toole. So David and Katie have gone into a partnership in a large-scale farm in Kilkenny, and they've both Chris, David and Katie have a really interesting story to tell. Now, I was down, there was a bit of a walk through your dry run there, and with Katie, David and Donald, some really interesting topics, really, really in-depth information, to the challenges of getting started. And I suppose from Donald's point of view and a banking point of view, how you sell yourself to a bank, what you need to bring to the party, how because listen, I suppose getting up and running, access to finance is obviously unsecured is a huge challenge, but there's a lot of things you can do to put your best foot forward in relation to business planning, stress testing, etc. But don't go through some of the key metrics that farmers need to understand. So a massive day, loads to be there. Encourage everyone to go that possible. There was a spanner in the works last year with the snow in Charleville. It's on in Charleville Park again. A really good venue, but hopefully the weather will be a lot better this time round. We'd only a smaller last year, but I think numbers will be up again this year, and it's a great opportunity to network as well. Sure.
I know it is something, to be fair. I think at those events, you'll always learn something from, someone there. And like when you call out the listed lineup of speakers that's there, you have it, I suppose, from the new entrant side and the younger farmer. Just the name that sprung to mind there was Chris Cahill. But then you also have the partnership that's set up. I suppose you have the more experienced farm that's there growing, the tons of dry matter. You're bringing also the research side of it. And then with that, I suppose something that also caught me ears there was, the farmer who maybe was once a businessman who went back to farming now. It's something I think in ag, sometimes growing up in ag, you can always nearly be some way warped when you're growing up in it, but sometimes having that outside perspective of someone can bring a real business strategy emphasis to it, who's coming into it like that, I think is always very valuable. So just one, what would you say the dates on that one was, John?
The dates on that are the Thursday the 8th. The social night is the correct term for that, and then the conference is on the 9th. So yeah, Thursday the 8th is the social night, and then Friday 9th then is the big one. So listen, it should be a good thing. And even like Irish Grassland Association, like it's all about driving grass, utilising, growing, etc. And like I'm very interested to hear from Chris Cahill, not alone on the partnership. I think that's been out there a lot, but also on the grass point of view. Like Chris, I suppose, runs his own business, Cavan Grassland Consultancy, and probably what differentiates that business from anything else is that, they do the measuring. There's lots of people offering the measuring, but I know from previous experience of knowing Chris is that they used to ring every single one of their farmers on a Monday or a Tuesday or whatever he was doing it when he started off, a lot of it at the weekend. They ring all of them and talk them through the decisions to be made with the grass. And that's moving the dial in relation to excellence in grassland management, because like listen, we have nearly too much information and we do nothing with it. So whether it's soil samples, milk recording, all the stuff we've talked about today, like the biggest problem is, and someone said it to me, a brilliant farmer said it to me, really well-known farmer down in Waterford, he said, the dearest thing that you can buy is information if you don't use it. like if you're spending money for side sampling or milk recording, it's a waste of time if you don't use it, but it can be the most valuable thing that you can do as well if you use it. So
100%, John, and look what you got to apply that right across, all farms. And like when you touch on, Chris following up with I suppose the farmers on a weekly basis, like the reality is if you look at any of the high performers, it's a weekly farm walk, and then at a minimum, even at times higher growth periods at times a year, it could be every 3 or 4 days even, so that's the level it really takes. So look, folks, I suppose that concludes the final podcast recording for 2025. We'll be back in January. Hopefully you all have a safe and happy Christmas, and hopefully, while we understand the workload won't stop at farm level, hopefully you'll be able to take a wee bit of time off and recuperate over the period. And until that, then we'll catch up in January.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Sod Pod. We hope you enjoyed it. To find out more, head over to www.grasslandagro.ie or check out our social channels: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn and YouTube. That's all for this episode. See you next time.